Here you go. I hope it's not too hot.
It's perfect, thank you.
Get him out of my house. I will not spend my last days staring at a useless body. Edgar Vale, once the strongest voice in every boardroom he entered, now lay motionless in a bed placed in the center of his own grand living room. His sister stood. Near the staircase, her perfume sharp and cold in the air, her heels pressing into the polished floor like tiny hammers of judgment. Around her, lawyers, nurses, and distant relatives watched in silence. No one stepped forward. No one defended him. Edgar could not move. He could not speak, but he could hear. And hearing was enough. The chandeliers above him glittered like they always had, but now they felt cruel. Once he had stood beneath them, signing deals worth millions. Now he stared at them from below, trapped inside a body that refused to answer him. A sudden illness had struck him down 3 months earlier. One moment he had been stepping out of his car, the next he was on the pavement, unable to lift his own hand. Doctors called it a rare nerve failure. They said his mind was sharp, but his body had shut its doors. Asterisk at first, the family gathered with tears and promises. But care is heavy work, and love without profit fades quickly. The nurses left one by one. The relatives stopped visiting. His sister, the only close blood he had left, began talking about facilities, about expenses, about how unfair it was that her life had to pause. No one wanted to take care of the paralyzed billionaire. No one except a man who arrived on a small red motorbike, carrying a paper bag of groceries. His name was Mateo Cruz. He had been delivering food to the mansion for years. He knew the guards. He knew the long driveway lined with trimmed hedges. But that day, the gates were open, and the house felt different. Too quiet, too tense. Mateo was thin, with tired eyes and hands rough from work. He wore a faded jacket that smelled faintly of rain and gasoline. Life had never offered him comfort. He grew up in a one-room home where the roof leaked every winter. His father had worked 2 jobs until his back gave out. Asterisk his mother had stitched clothes late into the night under a flickering bulb. Mateo learned early that dignity does not depend on wealth. It depends on how you treat those who can give you nothing back. He had once cared for his father after an accident left him unable to walk for nearly a year. Mateo had bathed him, fed him, lifted him gently from bed to chair. He remembered the weight of his father's body, the smell of medicine. Mixed with warm soup, the quiet shame in his father's eyes, and he remembered whispering, "You are not a burden, you are my strength." So when Mateo stepped into Edgar Vale's mansion and saw the billionaire lying alone, while relatives argued near the staircase, something in him tightened. Edgar's sister was saying they could not find anyone willing to stay overnight anymore. The last nurse had quit that morning. She complained that the patient stared at her as if he were judging her. Judging, Mateo looked at the man on the bed. Edgar's eyes were open asterisk. They were not angry, were not judging. They were trapped. Mateo placed the grocery bag on a table and walked closer. The marble floor felt cold, even through his worn shoes. He noticed the untouched water glass. Near the bed, he noticed the slight tremble in Edgar's eyelids. Without asking for permission, Mateo lifted the glass and gently tilted it to Edgar's lips. A small sip, then another. The room fell silent. His sister snapped at him, saying he was just a delivery man, that this was not his place, that they would handle it. Mateo did not argue, did not raise his voice, simply said he had cared. For someone like this before, if they needed help, he could stay after his deliveries. The relatives exchanged glances. Some laughed softly. But they were tired, and none of them stepped forward, so the delivery man stayed. The first night, the mansion felt heavy with shadows. The air smelled of polish and old flowers. Mateo moved quietly, learning the rhythm of Edgar's breathing. He adjusted pillows. He cleaned what needed cleaning. He spoke softly, even though Edgar could not respond. He told him about the city traffic, about a stray cat that followed him near the bakery asterisk, about how the sunset looked like melted gold on the rooftops. Edgar listened. Inside his silent mind, something warm flickered. For the first time in months, someone spoke to him as if he were still a man. Not a problem. Not a cost. A man, days turned into weeks. Mateo came every evening after his routes. He fed Edgar carefully, wiped his forehead when sweat formed, read him simple stories from old newspapers. He never rushed. The staff began to notice something strange. Edgar's eyes followed Mateo across the room. His breathing calmed when Mateo spoke. Small signals. Small signs of life. But Edgar's sister noticed something else. She noticed that her brother seemed more aware, more present. And she worried, because while Edgar lay silent, she had begun preparing documents, arranging transfers, planning a future where the fortune would move into her hands. One afternoon, she confronted Mateo. She accused him of pretending, of trying to gain favor, of hoping for money. Mateo listened quietly. His hands were folded in front of him. He said he did not want money. He only knew what it felt like to be left alone. When you cannot move, she ordered him to leave. And for a moment, the mansion felt like it would swallow him whole. Guards stood near the door. Staff looked down at their shoes. No one spoke. Mateo walked to Edgar's side one last time. He leaned close and adjusted the blanket. His voice was calm. Strength is not loud, it is patient. Then he stepped back. That night, something shifted. Edgar had been working silently with the only part of his body that still obeyed him, his eyes. Doctors had installed a small communication device days earlier, but no one had taken the time to use it properly. Mateo had. Every evening, he would hold up a letterboard, asking simple yes or no questions. Blink once for yes, twice for no. It was slow, it was exhausting. But it worked. And in those quiet sessions, Edgar had made a decision. The next morning, lawyers arrived, not the ones his sister had called others, older.com. Loyal to Edgar alone. In front of everyone, a document was read aloud. Edgar Vale had amended his will. A large portion of his fortune would now fund care centers for patients abandoned by their families, and a private trust would ensure lifetime security for one man. Mateo Cruz, gasps filled the hall. His sister's face drained of color. She tried to protest, to argue that Edgar could not have made such a choice. But medical records showed he was fully aware. The communication logs proved it. Every blink documented. Every letter spelled with effort. Edgar could not speak, but he had spoken. The room changed. Staff members who had once avoided eye contact now stood straighter. Some lowered their heads in quiet respect. Mateo stood frozen, disbelief washing over him. He had not stayed for reward. He had stayed because leaving felt wrong. Edgar's eyes met his. In them was something powerful. Gratitude, and something else. Victory. Because in a world that measured worth by movement and money, a silent man had just shown that dignity does not fade with the body. Days later, the mansion felt different. Lighter, warmer. The sister moved out. Care professionals returned, this time under strict oversight. Mateo did not become rich in the loud way people imagine. He continued his deliveries, continued living in his small home. But every evening, he still visited, not as a servant, not as charity, as a friend. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, a therapist announced something remarkable. Edgar's right index finger twitched. Just slightly, a tiny movement. The room held its breath. Mateo leaned closer, hope rising in his chest. He did not shout. He did not celebrate loudly. Simply smiled and whispered that progress is built from patience. And Edgar blinked once. Yes. Word of the story spread beyond the gates. News outlets spoke of the billionaire who rewarded kindness, but those who truly understood saw something deeper. A poor delivery man had reminded the wealthy world that humanity cannot be bought. Silent strength speaks the loudest. Respect is proven when there is nothing to gain. And sometimes, the richest person in the room is the one who chooses to stay. Months later, on a mild evening, the mansion gates opened again, not for lawyers, not for arguments, but for visitors. Volunteers inspired by the new care centers, families seeking guidance, Nurses trained to treat patients as people, not tasks. Edgar still lay in his chair near the window. But he was no longer alone. Mateo stood beside him, describing the sunset once more. The sky looked like soft fire fading into blue dot. Asterisk, the air smelled of cut grass and fresh bread drifting from a nearby bakery. Edgar's finger moved again, stronger this time. The crowd in the garden noticed. A gentle wave of applause rose, not loud or wild, but steady and respectful. It was not applause for wealth, it was applause for dignity. And in that moment, no one saw a paralyzed billionaire. They saw a man who had been given back his honor by someone the world had almost ignored. Because kindness does not check bank accounts. It checks the heart. If this story moved you, share where you are watching from.
Ow.
Tell us what dignity means to you, and subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet heroes who change lives without asking for anything in return.